Hi everybody, Deacon Bil here from Sacred Heart Parish. I'm in my home parish today in La Plata, Maryland. You've probably seen at some point a TV show or a movie, probably of pretty thin plot line, where somebody suffers amnesia and they forget everything. And of course, by the end of the episode or the movie, they'll probably recover it. But it's kind of a puzzling thing. What is amnesia? Is it just forgetfulness? Is it just not remembering something? Well, it's actually a real thing. It's a very rare thing, thankfully. It could be medical, it could be from an injury. And it's not the same as forgetting. I forget things all the time. I forget where I leave my keys or something else, but that's not amnesia. Amnesia is a separation from the reality of your identity. So when you don't know your name, you don't know who your family is or where you're from, and you have no connection back to that, it's a dissociating event, which is pretty traumatic because you don't have a sense of your own identity. So it's a Greek word, amnesia. Mnesis is to have a knowledge of or a memory of. Amnesia would be to remove that, obviously. Well, we have something in the church called the anamnesis, which is the same word root, but it's, I guess, the opposite of amnesia. In the Eucharistic prayer in the liturgy of the Eucharist, the priest will then say, "Do this in remembrance of me." Now, he's speaking in persona Christi, in the first person, as Christ himself in the Mass. And it's the words of Christ himself from the Gospels. Do this in memory of. Now, what's this? What's he talking about? Well, Christ has just established that the supper he has will be the memorial of his death, which he will suffer the next day. So, what he's saying here is, this is not something you're going to keep doing in the future just to bring back a memory of that one time when Jesus did something selfless for everybody else. It's the anamnesis. It's the reconnection to our own identity as Christians. So in the Second Vatican Council and in our catechism, it's been said that the Eucharist is the source and the summit of Christian life. The source is where it begins, the summit is where it's going, and everything in between. It's the most important aspect of our faith, which means the Mass, which is where the Eucharist comes from, has to be the most important event in our liturgical life. The Mass is the most important thing we do as Christians. But if we're to believe in the true presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist, as Catholics proclaim, how can it be that Jesus is truly in the Eucharist if we're not re-crucifying him every single time? And unfortunately, Catholics have been accused of that by people who don't fully understand our faith, our theology, and our sacred tradition. It's because of what Jesus said. We are reconnecting to the one event, not repeated crucifixions, but the one and only sacrifice made at Calvary. We're reconnecting with that. There's a theologian and professor named Scott Hahn who said, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but he said, going to the Mass is like sticking your foot in heaven's door and peeking inside. On this side of death, in this life, it's the closest we'll get to seeing heaven, but it is a reflection of the heavenly liturgy. So we've been given this great opportunity in our life to have a liturgy that connects us back. It's essentially a spiritual time machine. We're going back to the foot of the cross. We are there with Jesus Christ at the one and only sacrifice, which is what gives the priest, through his holy orders, the authority to call down the Holy Spirit upon the gifts and to make those gifts have the true presence of Christ. So unfortunately in English, and anybody who's ever heard me preach knows that before too long, I'm going to start beating up on the English language because we don't have that translation as strong as it should be. We say in remembrance of me, or in memory of me, in memorial of me. But those tend to make us think in English of just a passive memory of something that happened in the past. The anamnesis is much more powerful. It is lifting us up out of the present and putting us back at the foot of the cross for the one event. So that's always important to remember. When we hear those words, when we read those words, and we're in the Mass, that we're not here in the present now. We have been carried by Christ's grace right back to the very event by which we are saved. It's a beautiful thing that here in my parish we have here on the altar the words "in remembrance of me," that the people can see the entire time that we're in Mass. But it's important that we remember in Mass, this is not something we're doing as a passive memory, to remember some story we were told, but that we're being lifted up out of the present and being put right back there with Jesus Christ. And this Eucharist is indeed the true presence of Christ. God bless.